In the last section, we verified that we could create a promise and that a promise has three states: pending or unresolved, resolved, and rejected. And we could turn the promise into being resolved or rejected by calling either of these functions that are passed as arguments to the promise that we created. So let's expand on this a little bit more. Let's see, how do we actually make any use practically of a promise? I'm going to flip open a diagram that we looked at just a second ago. And if you recall, we mentioned that when a promise enters the resolved state, any callbacks that we registered with then, whatever then is, would get called. And whenever a promise enters the rejected state, any callbacks that we registered with catch get called. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what then and catch are and how to actually use them. And we're going to do this by, as you might imagine, working through an example practically, like a practical example. Okay, so whenever I create a promise and assign it to a variable, in this case promise right here, that promise object right here has two properties on it: then and catch. Now I said that we use then and catch to register callbacks, and that is exactly what they do. I can pass a function to this .then. I'm going to delete this catch line down here as well. So I can register a callback with the .then, and then inside of here, write in any code that I want to occur or to execute only after the promise has been resolved. So with the setup I have right now, I create the promise and then I immediately reject it. I say something went wrong, like this didn't go okay, something went wrong. So I'm going to take all this code and let's execute it and see what happens. So I'm going to paste it in, and I get that the promise was rejected, and I see absolutely no console log or mention of this finally finished string right here. So remember, .then, any callback that I registered with it or passed to the .then will not be executed if the promise gets rejected. It only gets called if the promise is resolved. So now I'm going to replace the reject with resolve. So now I'm going to expect my promise to be resolved successfully. And then I'll copy paste everything over to the console again. And you can see that I get a console log here of finally finished. So because I resolved the promise, because it went into the resolved state, which meaning to us, hey, everything happened successfully, every function that I passed to .then was executed. And so I keep on saying like every function, every function, every function. Well, whenever we create a promise like this, I can register multiple functions. So I'm going to chain on another .then, and inside of here I will say I was also ran. Okay, so now I'm going to copy, I'll clear again and paste, and we can see finally finished and I was also ran. So this is an instance where I registered two separate callbacks with our promise, and they were both executed as soon as the promise entered the resolved state. Now we spoke about .then, and we also mentioned the other keyword in here of catch. I'm going to do a little bit of reformatting of my code here just to make everything look a little bit nicer. By convention, whenever we're creating a promise, usually I like to follow this, this kind of setup here. I'll indent everything like so. So I put down the promise and then .then, and really I generally do that as well. So .then and .then. Because I'm not returning anything from these fat arrow functions, I could also omit the curly braces and the semicolon on the end as well. And so I think I'll do that here on both statements. And gee, that sure looks pretty darn nice, doesn't it? So again, we also get access to the .catch handler as well. So if I pass a function to .catch, and I'm going to say, uh-oh, any function that I register with catch is only going to be called whenever the promise gets rejected. So right now it's always getting resolved. Let's run this. I'm going to clear my console again. And we get our two console logs from the .thens, because those are saying .then is for, hey, I resolved successfully, everything went A-OK. We're going to do the same thing now, but this time around I'm going to reject the promise. So I'll reject it. When I reject the promise, it's going to enter the rejected state, and I'm going to expect only the catch statements to execute. So let's run it, and now I see uh-oh, meaning, hey, something went wrong here. You'll also notice that because I registered a function with the catch case, I didn't get that red error here where it said, hey, your promise, something went wrong there and you didn't really handle that case appropriately. Okay, so in this section, we've looked at how to pass functions to a promise to be executed when the promise is resolved or executed. But we're still kind of missing that final link in figuring out how to use a promise to execute a code only after some long-running process has completed. So let's continue in the next section and start focusing on practical applications of a promise.